The water was warm, almost too warm, wrapping around me like a cocoon as I sank deeper into the bathtub. The bathroom was my refuge, a small haven in our sprawling suburban home in Raleigh, North Carolina, where the world couldn't reach me. I'd lit a single lavender candle, its soft glow flickering against the white subway tiles, casting shadows that danced across the steam. My shoulders ached from a long day at the office, pushing papers and dodging office politics, and my mind was a tangle of thoughts I didn't want to face. I closed my eyes, letting the scent of lavender and the gentle lap of water pull me under, away from the chaos of being a wife, a mother, a woman who was supposed to have it all together. I was alone, or so I thought. Our house was one of those modern colonials you see in every upscale neighborhood around Raleigh, with its red brick facade, white shutters, and a front yard manicured to HOA perfection. Inside, it was all hardwood floors, shiplap walls, and farmhouse chic decor I'd spent months curating from Pinterest boards. It was beautiful, but it wasn't really mine. It belonged to my husband, Mark, and his son, Ethan, from his first marriage. I'd moved in 3 years ago, a new wife trying to fit into a family that already had its own rhythm. Mark was kind, steady, but often gone. His consulting job took him across the country for weeks at a time. Ethan, now 19, was quieter, harder to read. He'd been polite but distant, a college freshman who spent most of his time at school or with friends. I thought I knew him, thought I understood the boundaries between us. But I was wrong. I reached for the glass of Pinot Grigio I'd set on the edge of the tub, the condensation cool against my fingers. The wine was crisp, a small indulgence after a day that had felt like running through quicksand. I took a sip, letting it linger on my tongue, and leaned back, my hair spilling over the edge of the tub. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a gift when you're used to the hum of family life. Mark was in Chicago, not due back until Friday, and Ethan was supposed to be at a friend's place, studying for some midterm. I had the place to myself, and I was going to savor every second of it. I set the glass down and slid lower, the water brushing against my chin, my body weightless in the warmth. I didn't hear the front door open. I didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. I didn't hear anything until the bathroom door creaked, a sharp, intrusive sound that snapped my eyes open. My heart lurched, water sloshing as I sat up, instinctively covering myself with my arms. The candlelight was dim, but I could make out a figure in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable. "Ethan?" I said, my voice sharp with shock, cutting through the steam. He stood there, frozen, his hands still on the doorknob, his dark eyes wide as they met mine. The light from the hallway spilled in, outlining him against the darkness, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I should have screamed, should have told him to get out, but my throat was tight, my mind racing to catch up with what was happening. I thought you were at Jake's," I managed, my voice trembling, my arms still crossed over my chest, though the water and bubbles offered some cover. He didn't answer right away, just stood there, his gaze locked on me, something unreadable in his expression. It wasn't just surprise, wasn't just embarrassment. There was something else, something that made my skin prickle, something that made the air feel heavier than the steam. "I came back early," he said finally, his voice low, almost too calm. He didn't move, didn't look away, and I felt a flush creep up my neck, a mix of panic and something I couldn't name. I reached for the towel on the stool beside the tub, my movements clumsy, water dripping onto the floor. "You shouldn't be in here," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice betrayed me, soft and unsteady. I expected him to apologize, to back out, to close the door and let this moment vanish into an awkward memory. But he didn't. Instead, he took a step inside, and my heart stopped. The bathroom felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Ethan stood just inside the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. The steam curled around us, thick and heavy, blurring the edges of everything except his eyes, dark, intense, locked on me. My arms were still crossed over my chest, the water lapping against my skin, but the bubbles were starting to thin, leaving me more exposed than I wanted to be. I should have shouted, should have demanded he leave, but my voice was caught somewhere deep in my throat, tangled with the panic and something else, something that made my pulse race in a way it shouldn't. The towel was just out of reach, and my hands trembled as I tried to keep myself covered, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, to break this moment. "Ethan," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper, a plea more than a command. "You need to go." But he didn't move. His hand fell from the doorknob, and he took another step forward, the floor creaking under his weight. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across his face, and I saw it again, that look, not just shock or embarrassment, but something deeper, something that made my stomach twist. "I didn't mean to barge in," he said, his voice low, almost soft, but there was an edge to it, a weight that made the words feel heavier than they should. He paused, his eyes flicking down to the water, then back to my face, and I felt my cheeks burn, a flush that had nothing to do with the heat of the bath. "Then why are you still here?" I asked, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked, betraying the chaos inside me. I wanted him to leave, needed him to leave, but there was a part of me, a reckless, dangerous part, that didn't want this moment to end. It was wrong, so wrong, but the air was charged, electric, and I could feel it pulling me under. Ethan's lips parted, like he was about to say something, but instead, he took another step closer, close enough that I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides. I don't know," he said, his voice quieter now, almost uncertain, but his eyes didn't waver. "Can I stay?" The words hit me like a shockwave, stealing the air from my lungs. I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to process what he'd just said. "Stay? Here? In the bathroom, with me in the tub, vulnerable and exposed?" My heart pounded, a wild rhythm that drowned out the rational part of me screaming to end this now. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, told him to get out before this went any further. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, frozen, my arms still crossed, the water growing cooler around me. "Ethan," I said, my voice shaking, "you can't say things like that." But even as I spoke, I felt the lie in my words, the way my body wasn't moving, wasn't turning away. He didn't respond right away, just watched me, his gaze steady, searching. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint drip of the faucet and the crackle of the candle. Then he moved, not toward the door, but closer to the tub, crouching down so he was at eye level with me. My breath caught, sharp and unsteady, as his face came into focus, the candlelight highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. "I'm serious," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I want to stay." There was no hesitation now, no uncertainty, just a quiet certainty that sent a shiver down my spine. I should have pushed him away, should have stood up, grabbed the towel, anything to put distance between us. But my body wasn't listening. My skin was alive, tingling with the heat of his gaze, and I could feel the pull of something forbidden, something I'd never let myself acknowledge before. "This is wrong," I said, more to myself than to him, but my voice was barely audible, lost in the steam. Ethan's eyes softened, just for a moment, and he reached out, his hand hovering near the edge of the tub, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "Is it?" he asked, his voice so soft it was almost a challenge, and I felt my resolve crumble, just a little, just enough to let the moment stretch. I don't know how long we stayed like that, caught in this strange, electric dance, but it felt like forever. The water was cooling, the bubbles nearly gone, and I was painfully aware of how little separated us. My arms were still crossed, but they felt useless now, a flimsy barrier against the tension building between us. I wanted to say something, to stop this, but my throat was tight, and my mind was a haze of guilt and curiosity and something darker, something I didn't want to name. And then, before I could find the strength to break the spell, Ethan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not telling me to go," he said, and the truth of it hit me like a wave, because he was right, I wasn't. The bathroom was a haze of steam and shadows, the candlelight flickering like it was struggling to keep up with the weight of the moment. Ethan was still crouched by the tub, his hand hovering near the edge, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, but not touching, not yet. My arms were still crossed over my chest, a desperate attempt to hold on to some semblance of control, but the water was cold now, the bubbles all but gone, and I was exposed in more ways than one. His words, "You're not telling me to go," hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, and I felt them settle into my bones, a truth I couldn't escape. I hadn't told him to leave. I hadn't moved, hadn't shouted, hadn't done anything to stop this. And now, with his eyes locked on mine, I wasn't sure I wanted to. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a plea for him to stop, or maybe for myself to find the strength to end this. But my body wasn't listening. My skin was alive, tingling under the weight of his gaze, and I could feel the pull of something forbidden, something that made my heart pound and my mind spin. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me, his eyes dark and searching, like he was waiting for me to make the next move. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint drip of the faucet and the soft crackle of the candle. I wanted to say something, to break the spell, but my throat was tight, and my mind was a tangle of guilt and curiosity and something darker, something I'd never let myself acknowledge before. I shifted in the tub, water sloshing softly, and reached for the towel, my movements slow, deliberate, like I was testing the boundaries of this moment. Ethan's eyes followed my hand, and for a moment, I thought he might stop me, might reach out and close the distance between us. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his hand resting on the edge of the tub, his fingers brushing the porcelain, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. "You don't have to cover up," he said, his voice low, almost gentle, but there was an edge to it, a challenge that made my stomach twist. I froze, the towel halfway to my chest, and stared at him, my heart racing. "What are you doing, Ethan?" I asked, my voice shaking, but I didn't pull the towel closer, didn't cover myself. I just sat there, caught in his gaze, caught in the moment. He didn't answer right away, just watched me, his expression unreadable, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "But I don't want to leave." The honesty in his words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt my resolve crumble, just a little more, just enough to let the moment stretch. I should have told him to go, should have stood up, wrapped the towel around myself, and ended this before it went any further. But I didn't. Instead, I let my arms fall, just slightly, the water lapping against my skin, and I saw the way his eyes darkened, the way his breath hitched. The air was thick now, heavy with something unspoken, something dangerous. I could feel it pulling me under, and I wasn't sure I wanted to fight it anymore. "This can't happen," I said, more to myself than to him, but my voice was weak, barely audible over the drip of the faucet. Ethan leaned closer, his hands still on the edge of the tub, his fingers so close to mine I could feel the warmth of them. "Why not?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper, and I felt a jolt of something sharp and electric, something that made my skin burn. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him all the reasons why, because I was his mother, because Mark trusted us, because this was wrong in every way, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that wasn't just desire, wasn't just curiosity. It was need, raw and unfiltered, and it mirrored something deep inside me, something I'd been ignoring for too long. I don't know how it happened, how the moment shifted, but suddenly my hand was moving, reaching out, brushing against his fingers on the edge of the tub. It was a small movement, barely anything, but it felt like a surrender, like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, and I felt my breath catch, sharp and unsteady. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely audible, a warning or an invitation, I wasn't sure. He didn't let go, didn't pull away, just held my hand, his thumb brushing against my skin, and I felt the world tilt, the boundaries between us blurring into something I couldn't define. The candle flickered, the flame struggling in the heavy air, and I knew we were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could change everything. I wanted to pull back, to stop this, but my body was acting on its own, drawn to the heat of him, the way his touch felt like a spark in the darkness. And then, before I could find the strength to break the spell, he spoke again, his voice soft but certain. "Let me stay," he said, and it wasn't a question anymore, it was a plea, a demand, a promise, and I felt my heart stop, because I knew what my silence meant, knew what it would lead to, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. The bathroom was colder now, the steam fading, the candle barely holding on as its flame flickered in the heavy air. Ethan's hand was still wrapped around mine, his fingers warm and steady, anchoring me in this moment I couldn't escape. The water was frigid, clinging to my skin like a reminder of how long I'd been sitting here, caught in this strange, forbidden dance. My heart was still pounding, a wild rhythm that hadn't slowed, and my mind was a haze of guilt and desire and fear, all tangled together in a way that made it impossible to think straight. I looked at him, his face close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his breath came in short, uneven bursts. I should have pulled my hand away, should have stood up, ended this before it went any further. But I didn't. I just sat there, my fingers entwined with his, letting the moment stretch into something dangerous. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely audible, a last attempt to find some shred of control. But his name felt different on my tongue now, not a reprimand, not a plea, but something else, something that scared me more than anything. He didn't respond, just tightened his grip, his thumb brushing against my knuckles, and I felt a jolt of something sharp and electric, something that made my skin burn. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint drip of the faucet and the soft crackle of the candle, and I knew we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't take back. I wanted to say something, to stop this, but my throat was tight, and my body was acting on its own, drawn to the heat of him, the way his touch felt like a spark in the darkness. And then the phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound that cut through the haze like a knife. I flinched, my hand slipping from Ethan's, and he leaned back, his expression unreadable as the spell broke. My phone was on the counter, buzzing relentlessly, Mark's name flashing on the screen. My stomach dropped, guilt crashing over me like a wave, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "It's your dad," I said, my voice hoarse, barely recognizable. Ethan's eyes darkened, and he stood up, his movements slow, deliberate, like he was trying to hold on to the moment even as it slipped away. I reached for the towel, my hands trembling, and wrapped it around myself, the cold air biting at my skin as I stood, water dripping onto the floor. I answered the phone, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Hey, honey," I said, turning away from Ethan, as if that could erase what had just happened. Mark's voice was cheerful, oblivious, talking about his trip and how he'd be home tomorrow. I nodded along, murmuring responses, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the feel of Ethan's hand, the weight of his gaze, the way I'd let this moment spiral out of control. When I hung up, the bathroom was silent again, but it wasn't the same. Ethan was standing by the door now, his hands in his pockets, his eyes still on me, and I could feel the tension between us, still there, still heavy. "I should go," he said finally, his voice low, but he didn't move, not right away. I clutched the towel tighter, my heart still racing, and nodded, unable to find the words to respond. He took a step toward the door, then paused, turning back to look at me. It's not over," he said, his voice soft but certain, and the words sent a shiver down my spine, because I knew he was right. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to say that this was a mistake, that we could pretend it never happened, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I could. Not after the way he'd looked at me, not after the way I'd felt, not after the way I'd let him stay. He left, the door clicking shut behind him, and I was alone in the bathroom, the candle flickering weakly, the water still and cold in the tub. I sank onto the edge of the tub, the towel damp against my skin, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. My hands were shaking, my mind a tangle of guilt and fear and something else, something I didn't want to name. I thought about Mark, about the life we'd built, about the family I was supposed to be a part of. But all I could see was Ethan's face, the way his eyes had held mine, the way his touch had felt like a spark in the darkness. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my bedroom door, written in Ethan's messy scrawl, "We need to talk." My stomach twisted as I read it, a mix of fear and something else, something I couldn't admit to myself. Mark would be home soon, and life would go back to normal, or at least, it was supposed to. But as I stood there, clutching the note, I knew nothing would be normal again. Not after last night, not after the way Ethan had asked to stay, not after the way I'd let him. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wasn't over. And that scared me more than anything.